Hi, I'm Teresa Lubbers, Indiana's Commissioner for Higher Education. Welcome to FAFSA Friday, part of Learn More Indiana's annual Cash for College campaign. Keeping college affordable for Hoosier families is a top priority for us at the Commission, and we're working to make sure every Indiana student has the opportunity to complete education beyond high school. College continues to be one of the best investments you can make for your future. And when it comes to paying for college, filing the free application for Federal Student Aid, or FAFSA, is the smartest move you can make. Filing the FAFSA by March 10th makes you eligible for grants and scholarships from the state of Indiana, from most colleges, and from the federal government. And if you do have to borrow money for college, filing the FAFSA ensures that you have access to federal student loans with the most favorable repayment options. You're in the right place to get the best information on filing the FAFSA. Our experts will guide you every step of the way so you know what you need to do to complete your FAFSA correctly and on time. We hope you enjoy our FAFSA Friday presentation, and best of luck as you succeed in school and complete college.
Welcome to FAFSA Friday 2013, streaming live from Ball State University. The free application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA, can be pretty daunting, so we've invited two financial aid experts here today to answer your questions live. With us today, we have Bill Wozniak of ISM College Planning and Heidi Carl from the University of Indianapolis. She's their Associate Director of Financial Aid. We'll also be taking your questions live throughout, so we've got two students to help you get those questions in. Jake is an intern from Learn More Indiana, and Lydia is a Scholar Corps member here on the Ball State University campus. Speaking of questions, there's a variety of ways that you can get those questions into us throughout the presentation. You can always call our toll-free number at 1-800-992-2076. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen. You can email us at fafsa@learnmore.org, and we're on social media. You can tweet to us using @LearnMoreIn, or you can use the hashtag FAFSA Friday. Finally, we're on Facebook. Check us out at facebook.com/LearnMoreIn. And don't worry, I'll be repeating all of those ways to communicate with us throughout the presentation, so when you have a question, be sure to get it in live. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Bill and Heidi to tell us all about the FAFSA. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And Heidi, it's great to be here on FAFSA Friday once again. We have a lot to cover, but it's going to be a very informative and fun hour.
Thank you, Bill. I'm very excited to help everyone learn more about filing their FAFSA today.
So as we get going, let's start right in with the importance of the FAFSA. One of the most important things for so many Hoosiers is the 21st Century Scholars Program, and that program and the FAFSA have a very important connection.
Definitely, Bill. One important comment to make here for 21st Century Scholars is that date that you heard at the very beginning of the presentation. March 10th is the deadline in the state of Indiana to both file your FAFSA and also to complete your 21st Century affirmation. So very important that you follow that March 10th deadline and get your full eligibility for your 21st Century Scholarship.
Great advice. Another wonderful resource for the families here in Indiana is a great website, eStudent, and we need to talk just a moment or two about eStudent, how helpful that can be to Indiana families that fill out the FAFSA and then wonder about next steps or maybe how much aid they will receive.
The eStudent website, Bill, is the website where students can go and learn more about their state aid eligibility. This is a state website, and it allows students to log in and see their FAFSA data that's been sent to Indiana, and then also to track their Indiana awards that are coming from Indiana to the student. So definitely students want to get familiar with eStudent. One thing to note, however, is when you file your FAFSA, it takes a few days for the federal processor to process your FAFSA, and then it takes a little bit of time for the state to get that information in their website. I usually tell families, wait about a week or so, and you should see your FAFSA data in the eStudent database and can take a look and see that they have your information, and just make sure that everything is correct and there aren't any errors with that information.
Right. We don't want a family to file the FAFSA electronically, and everything is so fast these days, but then go to eStudent and get nervous 1 hour later that they did something wrong.
Right. Absolutely. Yes. Wait about a week or so and you should see that information out there.
Let's talk a little bit about the application process. The family fills out the FAFSA, they do everything right, they get everything properly set up. They go in, they do the FAFSA, they get it filed. Let's talk a little bit about the process, the steps that are now put in motion with the FAFSA.
One thing that we want to note here, Bill, is that sometimes a college or university might have a deadline that's earlier than the March 10th deadline. So students definitely want to get in contact with the college, or if they're still trying to make their choice, looking at 2 or 3 colleges, they want to get in contact with that college or university to make sure they don't have an earlier deadline than the March 10th deadline. Definitely file the FAFSA at the earliest deadline, either by March 10th, or possibly some schools have a March 1st deadline or even a February 15th deadline, which obviously is today. So we're glad if you're tuning in that you're getting ready to work on that if your school happens to have a deadline as early as today.
And that earlier deadline for a college is an important topic. I was giving a few presentations in the last couple weeks, and families were nervous because they had such an early college deadline that the information had to be submitted, and they didn't have their taxes done. And so they were a little nervous. You can use estimated numbers on the FAFSA.
Yes, you can. You can either use your tax data from last year. This year's FAFSA is requiring your 2012 tax information. So you might want to go in and fill in your FAFSA using your 2011 information, or you could use your W-2s and all of your income statements from 2012 and estimate your information. It's very important, Bill. We're going to talk a little bit later about the new tool that the FAFSA has, which is the IRS data retrieval. And that's a great way later, once your taxes are filed for 2012, to go in and correct that information. But that deadline is more important than having absolute accurate data. You want to get the FAFSA in on time, even if you have to estimate information.
Very good. Now let's go to the very beginning of the FAFSA process. Let's go to step 1, the very beginning, which would be registering for your PIN. We can talk just a moment about the importance of the PIN itself, what the PIN is, and how a family goes about taking care of that.
A student has to have his or her own PIN number, and this is a personal identification number, very similar to your bank PIN number that you might use for a bank account, a debit card, something like that. But this is with the federal government. So every student has to get their own PIN number. It's a 4-digit number that they will establish. And if the student is a dependent student, we'll talk a little more about that in a little bit, how that is determined on the FAFSA. A parent will also need to get a PIN number. Typically, it just has to be one parent, and these PIN numbers are used to sign the FAFSA form. So very important. One note to make, though, you can get these numbers while you're completing the FAFSA. So it doesn't have to be a separate step, but if you're maybe don't have your taxes completed yet, going to wait a little closer to that March 10th deadline, you can go ahead and get your PIN numbers now. And have those all ready to sign the document when you get ready to fill it out.
People get all fired up watching the FAFSA Friday broadcast here today, but they're not ready to do the FAFSA. They can at least get the PIN. Absolutely.
That's where you can start today if you want to get started.
Beautiful. So let's get to the very beginning of the FAFSA, and this is going to sound basic, but it's an important point for so many families across the country. We're going to give the URL, we're going to give the website where people go to start the FAFSA.
Basically, you want to go to www.fafsa.gov. Very important that you go to the .gov. Unfortunately, Bill, there are different websites out there that try to mimic the form, and the live site for the federal government ends with .gov. So make sure you get to the correct location.
Very important point. It'll save some families a few bucks. And we can then go to the login page, beginning page, but right before we get to this, I just want to throw this out there. Sometimes families hear there's a lot of questions on the FAFSA. They get a little nervous that there's going to be a lot of questions or a lot to address. But I think it's important to tell the families that so many of the questions are very basic. Name, address, email address. So many of the questions are just of the most basic nature, and that gets a whole big portion of the FAFSA done, so we don't want people to be intimidated by the number of questions.
Right, Bill. You can sit down and complete a lot of the form without any extra information there. It's information that you already know in your head, your name, your address, your date of birth. One note to make, though, is they do ask for your Social Security number, and people will ask sometimes, do I really have to put that in there? Obviously, that's sensitive information. And yes, you do. It's the federal government, the state government that's going to possibly be giving you grants and scholarships and loans. And so they do need your Social Security number to establish your application. Please know that they have great confidentiality and security systems, and that's one reason why you have that PIN number to sign your application. But this is one of the fields where you really need to be very, very careful. You need to make sure that you get that student's Social Security number input absolutely correctly. Every now and again, somebody will put in brothers or sisters' Social Security, or parents will start the application, and right away they're putting in their Social Security number. And it's important that this is the student's Social Security number that establishes the record.
Now, as we have talked about, this is an interactive broadcast, and I believe we're going to be able to take a live look in from Shortridge Magnet High School via Skype. And yes, there's everybody there at Shortridge Magnet High School, and this is a Skype shot from a high school that is enjoying FAFSA Friday, so it's great to see all the students and everyone there at Shortridge Magnet High School. Okay, so a great look in there at Shortridge High School, and we'll be talking there a little bit later on as we continue on through the FAFSA. We just got done talking about the login and that sort of information, and we can now move forward to the very beginning. So the family logs in, they give the most basic of information, and we get to starting the FAFSA.
If it's the first time a student is completing the form, you're just going to start right there with Start the FAFSA. But maybe you've gone out and done a FAFSA before if you were an upper class student, or maybe you used the FAFSA forecaster as a sophomore or a junior. You wanted to go out and take a look and see what your family would qualify for. If that's the case, you could use FAFSA renewal, but most people starting the application are going to do the Start New FAFSA.
And as we talked about before, the request a PIN, you have that opportunity there on that page, and that will happen throughout. But as we move forward from that, we get to create a password and re-enter your password. And nowadays, families are pretty familiar with the whole password and re-enter the password process.
This just helps if you think you might need to step away from the computer for a little bit. Maybe you're sitting down to do it and you need to go check on dinner or something like that, or your internet time's out. If you have that password, you can log back in if you don't complete the FAFSA all in one sitting, if you need to go back in there at a later date or time and finish it. So this is a great thing to do. Make sure you write it down, keep track of it so that you know what your password is when you need to get back in there.
And so now we go to a page which talks about some of the basic information that we're going to need. Along the left-hand side, you're going to see the blue student. Throughout the FAFSA, you're going to see either student or parent. And again, not the most difficult questions here on the FAFSA, Heidi, but maybe you can touch on a couple of the highlights here of the first 10 or 12 that we face here on the FAFSA.
This is just your basic information. So this is what we talked about earlier, where you're starting with your name, your address, your date of birth, those types of questions. Very important to notice the box on the right-hand side, which is the Help and Hints box. This is going to help you if you have specific type questions about something. It will give you advice about what you need to do to fill in that particular question.
So now we're off and running, we're inside the FAFSA, and we can move forward to the next batch of questions, which includes, are you a U.S. citizen? And also, when you finish your senior year, when you finish this year of high school, what grade are you? When you begin college in the fall, what grade are you? Again, not the most difficult of questions on the FAFSA, but if you would, Heidi, how about talk a little bit about this next batch of questions?
These questions, again, are just establishing the student's identity, so it's just basic information about the student. The one Bill mentioned is very important because it talks about, will you already have a degree? And students sometimes think because they're graduating from high school, they do have a degree. They have their diploma from high school, but they haven't gone to college and earned a degree yet. So definitely watch your answer there. Unless you're a student who is returning to school, you've already been once and going back, most of the time you haven't earned your degree already. And then you're going to just complete this basic information about yourself.
So after those questions, we move on to the high school where you are going. And this question, again, it'll be a drop-down type box. You'll be able to find your high school relatively quickly. Just make sure you get that right. But this question, Heidi, has come up as, of course, the government and other entities that are very concerned with how many students are filling out the FAFSA can get a feel for how students at a particular high school, what percentage, what number of students are filling it out. And that could be a tool that helps some counselors as well.
Definitely. This is very important as schools are really trying to work with their students and get everyone to complete FAFSAs so they're able to identify what their aid eligibility is. So you want to try to make sure you get your high school information in here accurately. And then the government can use this to send this information back to those schools and help them with knowing how many of their students have completed the form.
So at this point now, after answering the high school question, you're basically coming to the end of a section, and you have the opportunity here, of course, to save. It'll automatically at the end of a section save. And if we could just talk for one quick second here, Heidi, about these. At the bottom of the pages, always need help, and I really applaud the FAFSA team. You have need help asked for about again and again and again throughout the FAFSA. As you're in the different boxes, off to the right, you're going to see help. You're going to see need help at the bottom, and some of those things. There really is a lot of opportunities for assistance throughout the FAFSA inside the online form.
Right, and that's one reason, Bill, why we really promote for people to file the application online. It does have some question skipping. If you answer a question one way, it'll take you right ahead to other questions. The help is always there for you if you need additional help. So it's very important to use those tools if you have any questions or you get stuck along the way.
We'd also like to point out in this interactive broadcast that if folks have questions, as Sarah pointed out at the very beginning, of course the options on Twitter and those at the bottom of the screen there are available to you, because we love questions and we're open to that as we move along here through the FAFSA.
Definitely. We'd love to have you interact with us. So please send your questions via the emails or texting, Facebook. We'd love to have you call in as well, and we'll take those questions from you as they come in.
So now as we move forward, after the school selection, the section is completed, there's now a saving of the form. So we move on, and now we're going to get into the school selection process, which, because of the drop-down boxes and that ability on the FAFSA, it's not difficult. But Heidi, a very important couple items can come up here as the student and family are choosing which schools can receive the information. There's some definite tips that you can talk a little bit about on this particular aspect of the FAFSA.
You can select up to 10 schools that can get your FAFSA information. Hopefully that's enough, but if for some reason you're still considering more schools than that, you can always go back in later and change, or if you accidentally leave a school off the list, you're able to go back in and change those. But very important for you to, there's search tools there that you can use to find the schools that you want to have your information. And if you're still not positive on what school you're going to, I encourage students to put any on there that you're admitted to or you're applying to that you would like to have them give you a financial aid package to be able to take a look and see what you're eligible for with financial aid.
And from a school perspective, this is important that the student adds a school that is in consideration, and I try to talk about that when I'm speaking to families about the importance that you may put 3 or 4 in, and then as time goes along, your focus switches a little bit on which schools that you're considering for whatever reason, and you need to keep the FAFSA up to date if that school becomes a real possibility.
Right, definitely. You can go in and change these at any time. but you can put up to 10 of them in there.
Beautiful. So as we move along now, we can take a little of a screenshot and we can show the students and families that are watching. We just wanted to give a little picture here of a few schools were selected, and they're on there, and you can see also where you can add a school or you can adjust the order of the schools here on the FAFSA screenshot that we've just put up.
Yeah, you're able, this is the actual shot, as Bill said, where you can change any of the schools that you want to attend. And this is just, it shows you one of the questions you will be asked is your housing plans for a school. So are you going to live on campus, off campus, commute? So that's an example for you. And I'm so glad to see that the University of Indianapolis made it on this student's list. So we hope to see that on lots of lists. But there's a few other ones on there too. Again, it's just an example for you of what schools you might want to pick.
Once again, we have the opportunity to remind everyone about the different ways that they can ask for help during this interactive broadcast. Of course, the email address is fafsa@learnmore.org, Twitter, twitter.com/learnmorein, and the Twitter hashtag FAFSA Friday, the Facebook address as you see there, and the phone number as well. Interactive broadcast, and we're more than happy to interact. And let's go here. We have the opportunity to bring Sarah back in. And Sarah, what do you have?
All right, I've heard from Jake that there's a question from Twitter. So Jake, what do we have?
Yeah, we have a question via Twitter. It says, how long does it take to find out how much money you get from college?
Oh, fantastic question. Beautiful. Heidi, why don't we throw that one to you?
Okay, sounds awesome. Thank you. Well, Jake, that's a wonderful question. Basically, each school is going to be a little bit different. Typically, a student has to be admitted to a college or university to find out what they're going to get from that institution specifically. So the first step would be to make sure that you've applied and you're admitted to a college or university. And then every school's a little bit different, but most schools in Indiana kind of wait until that March 10th deadline. We want to get as many FAFSAs in as possible, because we know that most people are waiting until close to that deadline to apply. And usually we start sending out financial aid packages soon after that deadline. So if you're somebody who's already filled out the FAFSA, maybe back in January or February, you might not know yet what financial aid you're going to get, but you should know starting in March or early April. You also, once you do the FAFSA, you get an estimated Pell Grant that comes right back to you on the application. It tells you this is your estimated aid. And then we noted the e-student account with the state of Indiana. When the state runs their awards, you know what you're getting from the state on that website as well. So typically, usually March, April timeframe, but then it might be even a little bit later when you hear about state money too.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Sarah and Jake. And just like when we speak live at different places, Heidi, now the first question has come in through Twitter. So now the floodgates are going to open. You see the parents have questions and nobody wants to ask the first question. Then they do, and then it all gets crazy. So we'll see more of those coming up in the rest of the hour. As we go back to the slides here, now we get to a page. When we show the screenshot, families sometimes lean back a little bit. They get a little nervous. This page right here of questions is about dependency, and it is all just one question. It's all just focused on one simple question. Is the student considered independent or dependent? There's a few questions here, but Heidi, if you would, how about talk a little bit about the dependency section here?
This is a very important section of the application. Basically, this list of questions are the questions that establish whether a student would have to put their parents' information on the form, or if they're going to be able to fill out the form alone on their own as an independent student. So this list of questions about your age, what type of degree you're pursuing, whether you have your own children that you support, whether you've served in the armed forces and are a veteran. Going on through the list, these types of questions will establish that dependency. So if you answer yes to any one of these questions, then the FAFSA will just be filled out by the student. But if you answer no to all of these questions, then parent data is required on the FAFSA form. One thing that I will point out is there are questions here that deal with kind of some legal issues, Bill. Things like, have you been a ward of the court, or are you in foster care? Are you in a homeless situation? And those can be tricky sometimes for students. So if you need assistance identifying whether you qualify to be able to say yes in this area. You definitely want to talk with either your financial aid professionals at the college and universities you're looking at, or your high school guidance officers. They are great resources for you too, to help you be able to establish if you can answer yes to one of these questions, because it makes a big difference in the application if you do answer yes to one of these.
It absolutely does. And for our example here today, we answered the questions all no, so that the student was considered dependent, so we can show all the questions that we want people to be able to see. So if the answer was yes for one of those, then the parental section would disappear. But we answered it in such a way that we can show you the parental information, because we know so many families want to see that. So as you'll see on the next slide, we're going to show here the dependency status results. This is the message you would see if all the answers were no. This is the message the family sees.
This is an important message as well, Bill, because it asks the student, if you answered no, we're expecting you to fill out your parents' information. But if for some reason a student has special circumstances where they couldn't answer yes to any of those previous questions, but they still don't have access to their parents' information for one reason or another, they have the opportunity here to say, I am unable to provide parental information. They will need to talk with their college's financial aid staff. This is an area that's a little delicate, and they will need to work with those folks to see what their next steps will be. They can go ahead and complete the FAFSA, and they'll want to do that. They'll want to get that form submitted on time, but then they want to get in contact with the financial aid staff at their college or university and see what their next steps are going to be.
So after that step is completed, now on the next slide we're going to see the parent message along the far left-hand side. Again, when it's the student questions or student information, we'll see student along the left-hand side. Now for the parent, it will be parent along the left-hand side. And now we're going to get into the topic of who has to fill out this section, who is considered a parent, of course, if there's a divorce situation. And this is one of those pages where families often have a lot of questions. This is one where we want to make sure it gets done correctly. A very important set of questions here.
Right. It's a little bit subtle in our presentation today, but the parent section does turn to purple. And so you know that you've kind of switched from entering student data to entering parent data. But it's often a big question of who is the parent that fills out this form. Typically, if the parents, the biological parents of the student are still married, it's mom and dad who fill out the form. But if those parents are separated or divorced, possibly the student was raised by a single parent his or her own life, then it becomes a little bit more tricky as to who exactly fills out the form. So the first step is the natural parents. They would fill out the form if they are married and still alive. If for some reason one of those parents is widowed or single, divorced, separated, then the person who completes the application is the parent that the student lived with most the last 12 months. That can be difficult sometimes, Bill, in a 50-50 custody type situation. And so I tell students they really need to try to figure out which parent they lived with more. But every now and again, a student will say, it was absolutely down the middle. Even though there are 365 days on a calendar, at noon on that last day we switched. And so if that's the case, then the parent who completes the form is the parent who provided more financial support to the student in the previous 12 months. So that's kind of the direction that you go. If that parent is remarried, then the step parent's information does need to be on the form as well. So again, if you have questions, another tricky area, go to your local high school or your local high school guidance office, your colleges or universities for assistance. And it looks like Sarah might have some questions for us again.
I do. We've got a question on Twitter that I think a lot of students are probably wondering as this gets more and more complicated. Jake, do you want to go ahead and read it?
Okay. In a nutshell, how long is the process, the entire process?
Now, the question we, of course, would have, are we speaking of the FAFSA filling out process or the financial aid process? But we can sort of speak to both.
Sure. To fill out the FAFSA, you probably want to carve out at least 30 to 45 minutes. Even though we said, you know, a lot of the questions you're going to be able to just sit down and type right in your name, your address, your date of birth. those types of things are going to go pretty quick. When it gets to putting in the financial information, it's a little bit more tricky. So probably 30 to 45 minutes is usually what I see. The financial aid process we talked about, you will get your FAFSA data back usually within a week or so, I would say. But it might take a little bit longer for you to get an actual financial aid award letter from a college or university, again, because some of them don't start processing those letters until after that March 10th deadline.
And if the questioner has, if we didn't cover it all there because it's sort of a broad question, we're happy to elaborate further. And one of the important things is, and we've been talking a lot about this and we'll get further into this, if families have their tax information together or they have ideally filed their taxes electronically, the process can go quite fast these days.
Yes, yes, it can.
Okay.
Great, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Sarah and Jake. More questions from Twitter, we appreciate that. Now we can look at the next step here after we have determined and entered in the basic information there for the parents that need to be on the FAFSA. We go to the parent tax information question, and again, not a very difficult question, but an important one. Already completed, will file, not going to file. Heidi, talk a little bit about this particular slide.
Well, this is what we talked about a little bit earlier when we talked how you can go in and fill out the application even if your taxes aren't completed. So it asks you, are your taxes completed? Are they going to be completed, but maybe they're just not finished yet? And this kind of leads into our next question, which we talked about a little bit earlier too, on the IRS data retrieval. So very important for you to answer accurately. If you know you're going to file taxes and they're just not done, that's okay. You know, go ahead and answer it that way and then move on to the next question.
And so as we move on to those next questions that you just alluded to, we get to the questions about using the IRS data retrieval tool. This is something we have talked about again and again over the last few months with families and here on this broadcast here today. Now the questions about is the family going to link to the IRS? Should the family link to the IRS? And how is this done? It can save a lot of time and hassle for a lot of families, but not every family is going to use it.
Most families will be able to use it, but as you see the questions that were there on the screen, there are a few situations where you're not able to use the IRS data retrieval. If your parents are married and they filed a separate tax return, if for some reason they've had to file a foreign tax return, a couple of different situations make it where you can't use the IRS data retrieval. But if you are able to use it, we really recommend you do that. The process is a secure process where it goes out to the IRS website and pulls in both. Here we're specifically talking about the parents' information, but the students have the opportunity to do it for their tax information as well. So if you can use the IRS data retrieval, make sure you do. And in a screen here in just a minute, we'll talk about some important steps as you're doing that.
And we're going to get to that, I believe the screen that you're speaking about right here, where now the family says, okay, I would like to link up to the IRS. And then what does the family see? What do they see as they now say, yes, I would like to do this? And then if they want to go forward, they put in their information, and then what is retrieved, if possible, from the IRS? We have a couple pictures here of what they're going to actually see in the process.
Right, these are the IRS screens that you will see as you go out to retrieve your data. So it shows you how you have to put in some of your personal information to be able to pull the items from your tax return. So you're pulling basic fields like adjusted gross income, your taxes paid, the fields that are needed on the FAFSA that come straight from your tax return. Please remember this is voluntary, but it will make it a lot easier for you because it's pulled in accurately and that information comes straight from your tax return to your FAFSA document. And so it's real-time information coming in, the most up-to-date information. It is important to note, Bill, that if you're just filing your tax return, it does take the IRS a little bit of time to process your IRS tax return. So it's not instantaneous. You sit at your computer, you maybe use some type of tax preparation software, you hit send on your tax return, you're not going to be able to then log in and do your FAFSA immediately. Basically what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to wait roughly 2 to 3 weeks or so if you're filing your tax return electronically, and then it will be available for you to pull in through the IRS data retrieval into your FAFSA.
We had an event a couple weeks ago where we had warned the family that it's not going to work because they had only done their taxes electronically 3 days earlier. And of course, it worked like a charm. It just flowed right on through. But we have to warn folks to expect the fact that it's going to take time.
Yeah, and right now it might be a little bit quicker because the IRS isn't quite as busy as they will become that April 15th deadline. So if you are someone who's already done your taxes and have them in there, that may absolutely be the case for you, where it gets done a lot faster.
One other quick note that is worth pointing out at the very bottom of this slide where it says may reduce documents requested by the financial aid office later, this can save you time not only on the front end but possibly down the road as well.
Right. Sometimes families have to verify their FAFSA data to a financial aid office where they need to go through your documents and make sure that everything was completed accurately on the FAFSA. And if you've done this IRS data retrieval, you don't have to provide a tax return transcript to your college or university. They will be able to just go over these items based on them coming straight from the IRS. So it saves you a little bit of time. It also saves you paperwork, extra things that you need to turn into financial aid, and obviously it helps that college or university as they're trying to get your aid processed. It can move it along a little bit quicker. So a wonderful, valuable tool. We're so thankful to the IRS and the Department of Education for setting this up, and it really has helped families and colleges and universities to move the process along a little bit quicker.
Beautiful. So now we move along, parent financial information. So now we have to look at, not every family is going to use the IRS data retrieval tool. Not everybody's going to be able to use the IRS data retrieval tool. So what we want to show here is some screenshots and some examples here of questions that families will see. Maybe the families fill out their taxes on paper. They get their information all together. They put it on a paper 1040 or a paper 1040A. They get their information together, and now they go to this page. They get these questions, Heidi, and two important things I think here. First of all, the helps and hints that travel along through the FAFSA are very important, and I always like to point out to families, you see at the bottom of the helps and hints where it says use line ... And this is where, as a family's going through, maybe the words in the question confuse them a little bit or make a family uncertain. But boy, it's pretty straightforward when the helps and hints say use line 37 or use line 17B or whatever the case may be.
This is an area, Bill, absolutely, where that helps and hints sidebar can come in real handy. One question that families often have a lot of concern over is the one that asks specifically for what did you earn from working. And if you use the helps and hints section, it tells you exactly where to go to get that information. Typically, it's off of a W-2 form or possibly a number of W-2 forms if you've had more than one income source. So use those helps and hints. If you're not sure exactly what the question is asking you, you can always go and get further information. Looks like Sarah might have another question for us, so
Indeed.
Let's see what's coming in now.
Everyone is on Twitter today. We've got one more Twitter question, and Lydia is going to read it for us.
All right, this student is planning on going to Indiana Wesleyan, which is really expensive. Can she get scholarships for health problems through the FAFSA?
Well, I would tell her that yes, she can get scholarships and grants through the FAFSA if her family qualifies. That's one of the questions. And I would tell her not to write off a school this early if she thinks it's too expensive. Definitely send your FAFSA data to that college that you're looking at and let them work with you to provide you a financial aid package, especially if you have something like that, which would be a special circumstance. The FAFSA may not take that into consideration, as you note as we go through today. It doesn't ask you anywhere if you've had unusual medical expenses, but most schools will take a look at that and see if there's any way that they can help a family if they've had something unusual or out of the ordinary that's impacting their financial strength. So I would tell that student, get in touch with that college where she's looking at going. Be a diligent advocate for herself in talking with the financial aid office. If that's where she really wants to go, have them help her try to figure out a way to make it possible for her.
Thank you.
That's a great question, and it's a question that we hear all the time. And Heidi, I tell families all the time that if they prejudge what the award letter is going to say, if they just decide ahead of time what the award letter is going to say, in a worst case scenario, if they're nervous, it may say that, but a lot of times families are very pleasantly surprised.
Right, right. Yeah, sometimes, especially that college she mentioned, Indiana Wesleyan, is a private institution, and they often will have some of their own institutional dollars that they award to students. So that's why she wants to get in contact with them and discuss that with them.
Great question and a great topic. Thank you so much.
Great.
Okay, so as we move along here, and just very quickly on the last slide that you were talking about, Heidi, right before the question came in via Twitter, at the bottom of this slide we see a few different questions that talk about supplemental security income or free or reduced price lunch. I always want to let families know that on these questions, if you check the box next to the particular item, you'll see additional information come down underneath that that explains it a little better, maybe helps you find out if it applies to you or not. So checking those boxes can actually help you figure out if that applies to you or does not, if you don't know right off the bat.
Right, it'll give you a little bit more information about that particular program if you're not sure if you do receive benefits from them. And one thing to note too, Bill, is some people get a little bit nervous maybe if they do get some type of additional assistance from one of these programs, and they're worried that if they report this on the FAFSA, it will disqualify them from getting financial aid or possibly cancel those benefits. And that's not the case. It actually is just used to help the college or university to be able to know your family's strength in helping them understand your aid eligibility.
As we move forward throughout here, we also have a screenshot now of a little more detail of a few more questions here that as you're putting in the information, the helps and hints are there for you, and we just wanted to give sort of a visual example of what we just talked about there, where the box is checked and more information comes down.
Right. This will ask you some additional questions about additional sources or resources possibly of information that maybe you pay child support or you've received some other type of information or income information. So very important to read through these. And again, if you have questions, use that helps and hints area.
And now here, just the untaxed income part here, untaxed portions of IRA distributions, untaxed portions of pensions. Again, you check any that apply to you, check to see if any of these apply to you. Go through here, but again, just a few questions as the FAFSA is trying to look at maybe what your income is for a given year. Your FAFSA is trying to see what your assets are and whatnot. So again, it's just sort of trying to, as quickly as possible, get the whole picture of where a family stands on many of these items.
Right. All of the items that we talked about earlier are your basic tax information, and now we're looking at sources of income that your family receives that are untaxed. So they might be additional resources that you have to help pay for your expenses, but the government doesn't require you to put them on a tax return. So as Bill mentioned, these are things like untaxed portions of pensions, child support received, maybe it's payments to a tax-deferred pension or savings plan, lots of different items that you're going to have to put in. And if you notice, if you check one of those, then you will be asked to fill in an amount for it. And that's coming up on the next slide that you'll see. It'll show you how you will then enter information, and it also goes into asset information as well on the next slide. So you're able to give them a well-rounded picture of both your taxable income, your untaxed income, and then your asset information.
And here we have a question. As we talked about before, not all families will see every single question on the FAFSA. There is skip logic built into the FAFSA so that some questions will never appear. Families just won't see them. But as we get to the question here about do you have more than this amount of assets, you can click on the word assets to see the definition, which we'll show you in just a moment. But without getting too granular, now the questions come up about checking and savings accounts or the things that are considered assets, and a step-by-step by the FAFSA to find out what money is available as assets that the family has.
Right. The first question asks you just your basic balances in checking, savings, those types of accounts. And then if you look at the next slide, we go into more detail for you on what types of other assets you have to report. So investments, business income, those types of things. So it shows you what is counted as an investment. And this is important. We won't spend a lot of time today talking about the specifics of all of the different investments, but the list is there for you. And it's very important to go through that list and be able to see what you have to list and what you don't have to. The home you live in is not listed as an asset, as well as the value of life insurance or retirement plan. So that's very important to note here. And it looks like Sarah might have another question for us, so let's see what she has coming up.
There are actually 2 questions. We've got one on Twitter. Jake, will you go ahead and read that, please?
We have a good amount of Twitter coming in right now. But a parent wants to fill out a paper version of the FAFSA application. Where can she download this from?
The paper FAFSA can be downloaded from the FAFSA website as well. So that website we mentioned earlier, the www.fafsa.gov. So www.fafsa.gov, and right on the very first page is a link that says get a paper FAFSA. So you can go get that paper form, download it, fill it out, and you will have to mail it in. An important note here, Jake, is that the FAFSA has to be mailed and be received at the Federal Processing Center by March 10th. So that doesn't mean go to your post office on March 10th. It means it has to already have reached the Federal Processing Center by March 10th. So if you're going to do a paper form, I tell families mail it by March 1st at the absolute latest. You want to make sure that it gets there on time. That's one reason why we mention having families do the online form, because once it's sent and submitted and you get your confirmation, you know it's already at the Federal Processing Center. But if you really want to do paper, make sure you mail it so it's received by March 10th.
And if I could just add on to that before the next question, if they would like to contact us right after the live show and we could talk a little bit with them about trying to encourage them to use the online version, you know, give us a buzz right after the, the live online show. I know there's another question.
All right, great. Lydia, can you tell us what we have on Facebook?
Yep. There is a student that had their Pell Grant calculated for a school that they entered in the first position, but they decided to attend a school that was one of their other choices. Then they said that their Pell Grant award amount changed. Is there a way to know when that their award would, is there a way to know that there's an accurate way of knowing what their Pell Grant? Does it matter what school you attend? Does it change on the school that you attend?
Typically, the Pell Grant is going to be the same from one school to another, but it could change based on a student's enrollment. So maybe at one institution a student was going to go full-time, and at another one they're going part-time. That could make it change. It could change based on the student's FAFSA data. So maybe school A provided the Pell Grant estimate before the FAFSA data was finalized. Maybe one of those situations where we talked about if you're estimating your data. And then school B, the Pell Grant was sent after all of the FAFSA data was completed and accurately submitted. So that would be the only situations where I would see that a Pell Grant would change, because typically that Pell Grant follows the student and it is their award at any institution. But it could change based on enrollment, because it is based on whether you're full-time, half-time, three-quarter time, something along those lines.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good information. Thank you so much. And keep those questions coming in.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Sometimes on some of these questions, when you work with families, a little more information is sometimes helpful, because as the process goes along, time goes along, more information comes in. So it can be a few different things.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Beautiful. So now as we go back to the slides here quickly, we are talking about what is considered an investment, what is not considered an investment, and that can get a little granular and a lot of detail. That information is on the FAFSA, and you have all sorts of different social media ways to check into that or call the federal government about that. Very important, and we do understand that that can cause some questions for different families. As we've talked about before, the different ways that people can contact us here today, the different social media platforms that families are now taking advantage of, and we think that's wonderful. And as we get back to the slides, we can talk a little bit about the fourth question here. all we want to show here, and this gets a little bit granular, Heidi, we're just going to show an example of the investment farm, the small business question. Again, this is still that same section. It's still that asset section where you talk about what is your balance of cash and savings, what is the net worth of investments, and then that last one, the value, the net worth of parents' businesses or investment farms. And we can just throw that up here very quickly. That can help some families. The details of what counts and what doesn't count. And Heidi, if you just want to talk to this slightly confusing part for a lot of families.
This can be very confusing, Bill, because a lot of people think, well, I have a small business or we have a family farm, does it have to be counted? In that small business, one of the most important items is how much of that business you own and also how many employees that business has. And most of the time, a business does not have to be added onto the FAFSA because that family maybe doesn't have the percent of ownership that's required, or they don't have more than 100 employees, which is the case in a lot of small companies. Maybe they don't have that many employees. Also, a family farm, if you live on it and operate it, it's not included. So the only type of farm that is listed is an investment farm, maybe where you live someplace and you farm somewhere else. And so as you saw on the screen, there are a lot of tips and hints here for you, as well as you can always call the federal government and explain what type of business or farm you have, and they'll tell you whether it has to be listed or not.
Now, one of the great bits of news we have is as we move back now to the student section, we go to student information section. We're going to go back to the blue. We're going to go back to the student on the side. But so many of the questions are identical. The government is looking for the same types of information. So we don't have to go granular on each of these, but on the slides that we're going to show you, starting with the first one, again, what is the beginning? Just like with the parents, we're looking at has the IRS income tax been completed, or what's the filing going to be, just like with the parents?
Right, we're starting the student section, all of the income items for the student, just like we went through with the parent. And so it starts with, have you completed your form? Is it already sent off, your tax form? And so the student will start answering those questions. And again, a reminder that the student can use the IRS data retrieval. And so if you answer that you have already filed, then it will give you the option to be able to link with the IRS and pull in all of your tax information.
And Heidi, during this interactive broadcast, we have been so happy today to be able to check out the friends that are at Shortridge Magnet High School with us via Skype today, and some enthusiastic, wonderful students there at Shortridge Magnet High School. And here we're taking a quick live look-in, a Skype live look-in with our friends at Shortridge Magnet High School, waving and saying hello, and joining with us via Skype. And we're very happy that we have all those smiling faces talking financial aid with us here on FAFSA Friday.
Right, we know somebody is watching, right, Bill? Hello to all the students out there at Shortridge. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. There they are, giving us a big hello.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Okay, so as we continue on here, we're in the student section. As we said, we can go through this a little bit faster. First of all, students quite often have less here to report or answer than the parents do. But again, we've gone through the basic questions. So now on this next slide that we're going to look at, Heidi, where again, the option could, the student could use the IRS data retrieval tool just like the parents.
Right, we won't spend a lot of time going through these next few slides, but they're the basic IRS tax information that the student has to complete. So it models what we've already reviewed with the parents, asking for adjusted gross income, taxes paid. And as we show you on the slides, you do have the option to do that IRS data retrieval to pull this information in, as long as you qualify for that option.
So as we move on now to the next slide, a few more questions. Again, this group of questions is not going to look unfamiliar, because what are we looking at here? We're looking at adjusted gross income. We're looking at how much did you earn from working? Again, the same types of questions as we saw with the parents.
Right, and then we move also right into asking then about the student's other financial information. So the amount of income tax, the amount of exemptions, it moves right through just like the parent section did.
and then we go into student financial information. The next group of questions here is going to go into the amount of income tax for 2012, enter your spouse's exemptions. And again, this is just another example where when we hear things like exemptions, we hear terms that are used with taxes. It's so familiar because we heard them so often with taxes. Again, not unfamiliar, the questions that come up here on this next batch here. Again, this is for the student, not for the parents. You just go through and address them as we did in the earlier section.
Absolutely.
So now we go to the next group of questions, and this group of questions, just like in the parent section, check any that apply. If you have a question, you can check the box, get a little more information. You always have the Need Help button at the very bottom. You check the box, look if it applies to you. If it doesn't apply to you, uncheck the box, move along. Anything, Heidi, on this group, this set of questions here that stands out to you, that's different, or something that you just want to make a note of on this group?
Pretty much it's the same information that you did with the parent, but remembering that you're looking at the student now. So you're looking at the student's untaxed income and asset information. So it's just specifically the student. You don't count any assets that the student and parent have together or anything like that. It's just the student's information.
So now we get to a very important slide, which is the sign and submit. And I always like to take just a moment or two here with the families, because this is now where the student via PIN, again, if it's being done electronically, is going to say, I've read this is me, I'm looking at the legalese at the bottom, as well as the parent on the right-hand side of this slide. This again is the legalese, this again is signing via PIN number and saying, this is me, this is the parent, we've read all this, and we're ready to move on here and submit the FAFSA.
Right, this is the final step to make sure that the FAFSA gets submitted. So students and parents want to make sure that they do sign with their PIN numbers, and that's what authenticates all of the data. It is important, as Bill noted, that you are signing that all of this information is accurate. And one thing I would note here is kind of my comment earlier about how you can put estimated data. It's okay to put that estimated data and still sign here, because you know that once you get correct tax information, you will be logging back in and correcting that information. So don't get nervous that if you're signing that it's accurate and you know it's not the absolute data, that you can't still go back in. You always have the option to do corrections.
And next we're going to go to a page that I always tell everyone, whether what event it is, to print this page. To make sure you print this page, in the upper right-hand corner, of course, we're going to have an important confirmation number, and we want the family to have that data. And on this page, you get an estimated expected family contribution. You get some other information about some aid that may be available for that particular family. You also see which schools you have listed in the FAFSA so far. You can always go back and change and adjust that. But this, to me, Heidi, is a page that families definitely want to print.
It does. It's your confirmation that the FAFSA was submitted, so you want to hang on to that. It's your proof, as we say, that you did get completed and you got everything in on time. And then, as Bill said, it has accurate information on there for you to be able to use to start getting an estimate and be able to start looking at what your aid eligibility will be.
So now we can talk a little bit about the processing of the FAFSA and what's going to happen. And again, at a very high level, the family hits submit. They send in the FAFSA, and now what's going to happen? The government's going to get going. The schools are going to be able to get some information. You're going to get some information. What happens now, Heidi, when the family submits the FAFSA properly?
They're going to get back a student aid report, and it's going to have all of your FAFSA data on there for you. So it's important to look that over and make sure that all of your data is accurate and correct. You're also going to then be able to start logging in and making corrections or updates if you need to, and be able to log in, as we mentioned earlier, to the state's website, the Indiana State website, eStudent. It also will show you what schools you sent your information to, so double check that and make sure everywhere you wanted your FAFSA results to go to has received it. And then that's when the schools will start putting together for you financial aid awards and sending to you your financial aid package and what you're eligible to receive at their institution.
A very important term and a very important process that helps a lot of families is something called special circumstances. The FAFSA is always looking back a year. The FAFSA is always going backwards to, in this case, 2012 for the 2013-14 year. But as we know, illnesses arise, divorce happens, people lose jobs, etc. Special circumstances, very important, and it can help a lot of families.
Definitely it can. And real quickly, I'll answer as I see Sarah has another question for us. But basically, families want to get in contact with their financial aid office, as we mentioned to that person who had a question earlier about medical expenses. If you have any of those special circumstances that weren't addressed on the FAFSA, contact your college or university that you're looking at attending and talk that over with them to see if there's any additional consideration that can be made. Sarah, what do we have?
Well, in addition to all of our social media questions, we are also taking questions at FAFSA@learnmore.org, and we've got a couple of those for you, and Jake is going to go ahead and read that for us.
Here's one. It says, our grandson has lived with us since he was little. However, we do not have legal guardianship. Do we report our information on his FAFSA, or do we have to get his mother's information?
This is reminiscent of a question we had a few days ago at another event. Yep.
Yeah, that is a very common question, but a very important one. Grandparents cannot complete the FAFSA for their grandchildren. The person who has to complete the application is the biological parent or parents. So unfortunately, it's not based on where the student lives, but it's based on their actual parent. What I would tell those grandparents, Jake, is I would tell them to, with their student, go talk to the college or university where the student is thinking about attending. Yes, the mother should be the one filling out the form, but if for some reason there are extraneous circumstances, they might want to talk to the college or university about that.
We've got a couple more questions on email as well. So Jake.
Yeah, we have another complicated situation.
Okay.
It states, my student's mother remarried a few years ago and left soon after they were married. They are still technically married, but he has not been there in over 2 years. Should this student check divorced or separated in the parent information section for their parents?
Well, Jake, I feel like I might be missing just one piece of information here, but it sounds to me like the student lives with one parent and the other parent got remarried and isn't around anymore. Would you say that is correct? Okay. So it sounds like the parent who needs to complete the form is the parent that the student lives with. So that other parent isn't a part of the FAFSA form. It's the parent that they live with that has to complete the document. So it doesn't matter if the other parent is remarried or where they're living. It's the parent that they live with that completes the form. And if that doesn't quite answer that question for that student, I would encourage them to email us again and maybe clarify a little bit more the situation. I'd be happy to answer it again for them.
Definitely, thank you.
Right, we just want to remind you all that we will be looking for your questions even after this broadcast is over. So if you have questions that we aren't able to get to today, don't worry, we'll get to them later. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. So now, just very quickly, as we tie up the special circumstances comment that we were just talking about before those wonderful questions came in short, Heidi, if something comes up, whether it's before the student gets to campus or during the beginning of the semester, if something happens, big medical bill, divorce, losses of jobs, it doesn't hurt to touch base with the financial aid office.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So now let's get to some additional application requirements. Again, some institutions will make some additional money available. As I tell families all the time, if the school says, please fill this out, please fill that out, here's what we need it by, here's the form we need by. Again, I think it's worthwhile because you want to be considered for all types of free money that you can. But different schools have different processes and different requirements.
Right. Check with each college or university that you're thinking of attending. They might have their own institutional application that you have to complete, or they might use the CSS profile form. They'll let you know if there's something in addition to the FAFSA that they need from you, and you'll want to get that in by whatever deadline they've established for that document as well.
So we have a couple questions that we put on a slide ahead of time about 5 common FAFSA questions. And as usual, Heidi, we've covered a whole lot in this last hour, and we may have touched on a few or all of these. Let's see. I haven't finished my taxes yet. What should I do? I think we covered that about estimate. And You can use estimated information. You can put the taxes on the 1040 or 1040A, whatever form you're going to be filing, and then input the data into the electronic FAFSA form as you go along. You can have the right answers even though you have not filed your taxes formally. Maybe you're waiting until April 13th, but you go ahead and get the FAFSA correct.
Right. You can go in and use the estimated documents, as Bill mentioned, your previous year's taxes or your W-2s that you estimate. So I think we did pretty much cover that, so everyone should be good there. The next one talks about, why do I have to put my parents' information? And that's a basic tenet of the application, that it's based on both the student's and his or her parents' financial information. So if you remember back when we were looking at the dependency questions, if you're not able to answer yes to any of those, you are considered a dependent student, and so your parents' information has to be included.
And as we talked about, my parents are divorced. Which parent do I use on the FAFSA? Again, you pointed out the parent where the student has lived more in the previous 12 months.
Right. That parent, or if they lived equally between both parents, then they can look at which parent provided more financial support for the student. But one of those parents and his or her new spouse, if they're remarried, would also have to complete the form. Also, if a student is unable to provide their parents' information, basically what will they do if they have that type of special circumstance? And we talked about how they would want to get in touch with their financial aid office, because there might be additional things that they need to do, but they do want to go ahead and complete that form even if they don't put parent info on there, and it's suggested that they do.
And I love the fifth one, very important. Does my retirement plan count as an investment on my FAFSA? And of course, we answered that with the investment plan. But this is very important, because this makes a lot of parents nervous.
Right, definitely. Some parents, that may be one of their primary ways of saving their resources, and it isn't counted. So if it's a basic retirement plan, it doesn't have to be counted. So very important to note that.
Okay, now quickly, 5 common FAFSA mistakes, and just like we had with the previous slide, again, we've touched on a lot of these so far. Incorrect Social Security number is, of course, a big one. A couple of these very important, but filing electronically can be very helpful for things like the second item here about mistaking adjusted gross income, because you would either be importing the tax information right from the IRS, or you would be just using the line number that the helps and hints tell you. Again, another great reason to file electronically. It helps you minimize mistakes. It helps you get the right line number. Sometimes the words confuse me, but when I see line 37A, I know what line 37A is. Heidi, just a thought or two about one or a couple of these 5 common FAFSA mistakes.
Well, I think number 4 is probably one of the biggest ones for us today, Bill, and that's, make sure you're filing by that March 10th deadline. Don't miss the state deadline. That's very important. The state of Indiana grants are very generous, and we don't want a student to miss out on that opportunity to get their state grants by filing late. So please make sure you make your application by March 10th. And also, I like to point out that last one. Some people, it was kind of one of the questions that came in about not sure if you can attend a certain university or not. If you haven't completed a FAFSA before, don't think that you make too much money. Give the form one try, fill it out, see what your eligibility is, and then you can always decide later not to do it in your future years. But at least if you do it the first time, you'll know your eligibility. It looks like Sarah might have another question for us.
I don't have another question, but we wanted to thank the students from Shortridge who are watching via Skype. And I think we're going to get another view of them in just a minute here. There they are. Thank you, students.
They're going to keep going for a little bit longer. They're going to thank you. So you're not going to see it right away. You'll see it in a little bit, okay?
We want to remind you at Shortridge that if you have any questions, you can ask them to us as well. All right, thank you very much, Shortridge. It was so great to see you, and we hope to see some of your questions too.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to everybody at Shortridge Magnet High School. Very quickly, the last item, I think it just bears a couple seconds, not filing because you think you make too much money. Heidi, I'll be talking to a family that has 2 students in college at the same time. They might have the number in the household is a high number, And very quickly, if you have more than one student in high school, in college, if you have a higher number in the household, what may seem like a little bit too much money to get aid really isn't, and we just don't want families to miss out on free money.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So as we move forward, we have another great resource that we want to make sure that families know about here, and that, of course, is College Goal Sunday. College Goal Sunday, and that started right here in Indiana, and we're very proud of the fact that College Goal Sunday began here in Indiana. It spread like wildfire almost across the entire country, and that's coming up very soon.
February 24th, 2013, at different locations all across the state of Indiana. It will be at 2 p.m. on that Sunday, and to find out more information, you can go to the web address that's listed on the screen, collegegoalsunday.org, and find a location close to you. The great thing about this day, Bill, is that there are many, many financial aid experts from across the state, from different high schools, colleges, and universities who volunteer their time to be able to help students and parents complete their FAFSA. So even if you've watched today and you're still not quite sure, or you just want a little bit of extra help to fill that form out, come to College Goal Sunday and we'll help you with getting your FAFSA in on time.
Speaking of extra help, we have another question that Lydia received on email. I just want to remind everyone that email is fafsa@learnmore.org. Lydia?
The question is, my son is a junior. Is it too early to create his online financial aid application? He won't attend college until fall of 2015.
Wow, a real go-getter. What do you guys think?
FAFSA Forecaster?
Exactly, yes. FAFSA Forecaster is a wonderful tool that sophomores and juniors can go out and use. It's on the federal website as well, fafsaforecaster.gov, and they can go out and complete an informational application that will give them an estimate of aid back to them. That will allow them to be able to see a little bit about what the FAFSA will look like. It asks some similar questions and gives them an estimate. They don't want to do the FAFSA yet. It is year specific. So the one that's available right now is the one for students who will be entering college in the fall of 2013. So if you are a parent of a sophomore or junior, go use the FAFSA Forecaster instead for right now.
And you'll be able to bring in the information.
Absolutely.
Slide the information right in electronically.
That's right. That sounds like a time saver. And now we've got another question via Skype from Shortridge Magnet High School in Indianapolis. So we're going to go on over to them now.
Hi, I'm Darlene Brown. What if I have special circumstances and can't get my parents' data to report on the FAFSA?
Great question. If there's special circumstances and the student can't get the parent information into the FAFSA, the parent information is needed, but it can't get into the FAFSA.
What I would tell you is that you want to contact the college or colleges that you might be looking at attending. Go, if you can, to the location. If you're not able to get there physically, you can call them on the phone or use the internet to get in contact with them. They might have some type of additional form that you need to complete to tell them about your special circumstance, or they might need you to come in and speak with one of their counselors about your situation. It does sound like it might be a sensitive type situation, and so there might be additional information you have to provide to that college or university to help them guide you along in what you exactly need to do to get your form completed.
Great, thank you, Heidi. We've got one more question from Shortridge, so we're going to go ahead and go to Skype again, please.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Lavertu. What do I do if my parents haven't filed their taxes yet?
Great, thank you. What do you guys think?
Great question, and this is something that we've addressed a little bit during the broadcast, but it's one of the most popular questions. Taxes aren't filed yet. What do we do? Can we estimate? Can we use 2011 information? You know, all of that. So there's plenty of options available.
Right. Typically, you're either going to use your 2011 information to fill out the form, and then once your 2012 information is completed, you'll go back in and correct it, or you can estimate using your 2012 income information, like your W-2 forms or 1099 forms that you have about your income. So definitely still file by the March 10th deadline. Estimate your data if you have to right now, and then just know that you'll have to go back in and correct it once your parents do file their taxes. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Heidi, and I just want to remind students that those corrections are due by May 15th, and Learn More Indiana will be having an Ask the Expert online chat session, so we can help you with your corrections in May if you need that. Now we've got another question from Shortridge. They're full of them today, so we're going to go to Skype again. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Cameron Shepard. How do I get my PIN number, and what if I can't remember my PIN number?
Beautiful, very important. That's at the very beginning of the process, pin.ed.gov.
Right.
Pin.ed.gov. You'll go to pin.ed.gov, and you'll be able to get your PIN number there. And all throughout the FAFSA, if you forget ahead of time, you can go to pin.ed.gov. But all throughout the FAFSA, right to the very end, you're asked again and again, if you forgot your PIN, would you click on it, just like we forget passwords all the time for different websites and different things. You can go in there and it's very easy. You'll click on the hyperlink and go right there to get, it'll ask a question or two to make sure it's you, and you'll be able to get your PIN.
Right, you can retrieve it at that point, like Bill said, by answering questions or having it emailed to you again if necessary.
All right. Well, personal confession, I forgot my PIN. I didn't have you two to help me when I was in college. We do have one more question from Shortridge, and this time it's a parent. So if we could go to Skype again, we'll take that question as well.
Hi, I'm Greg Nowling. I had to cash in part of my retirement to pay some bills. Do I include that as investment income, or how do I include that?
That's an excellent question. Basically, if you had to cash in retirement, it's typically going to be reflected on your tax return in your adjusted gross income. So it's captured in that line. So you would not count it in any additional places, like in the untaxed income or anywhere there. What I would tell you is there is a question in the untaxed income section that talks about untaxed pensions that you received, and it directs you specifically to lines on your tax return. And so you'll want to look at your tax return and see if you have any entries in those lines. But most of the time, if you've taken out some cash from a retirement, it will be reflected in your adjusted gross income because it is taxable income.
All right, thank you very much to Shortridge Magnet High School for Law and Public Policy in Indianapolis for all of your participation. We're very glad to have had your questions and know that you are watching this live for the entire event. We've got some other questions that Jake has received via Twitter. So Jake, if you could tell us those questions.
Yeah, we have a tweet that reads, does each person get the same amount of money?
If only.
Yeah, in a perfect world, right?
In some ways that would be good, in some ways that would be bad.
Right. No, it's all based on your financial information. So that's why you and your parents have to complete the document and put in things like your adjusted gross income and your asset information. So most financial aid is what we call need-based aid. So it's based on your family's financial strength and your need for financial aid. But there are some grants and scholarships out there that might be based on other factors. So you should search if you think your family might not qualify for need-based money to see what other types of financial aid scholarships you might qualify for and apply for those.
Anything else?
We don't have any more questions right now, but I want to remind everyone of all of the ways that you can get a hold of us. You can email us at fafsa@learnmore.org. That's at the bottom of your screen. You can call us at 1-800-992-2076. And then, of course, there's all of those wonderful social media ways that you can get a hold of us that we've been seeing a lot of today. Our Twitter hashtag for the day is FAFSA Friday. And our Twitter account is @LearnMoreIn. You can also find us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/LearnMoreIn. Thank you so much for all of your questions, and we'll wait a few more minutes and see if we get any more in.
And we'll, of course, be happy to answer if they come in afterwards. We're not going to leave anybody stranded. We'll make sure
we'll make sure all those questions get answered.
Nobody will get abandoned there. So March 10 deadline is, of course, the one thing that I just want to throw in here as we get to the very end. The March 10 deadline, we've said it a few times, but it bears repeating. We don't want anyone in Indiana that needs, that is going to be attending college in the fall next year. We want them to not miss that March 10 deadline because the state aid can be so significant and generous. They can't miss that date, Heidi.
Absolutely not. And also, Bill, it's good to mention College Goal Sunday. You also will have an opportunity to come and have experts help you complete the form. So if you're watching and you're not quite sure yet, if you have the confidence, which we know you do, but if not, come and we'll help you with filling out the FAFSA at College Goal Sunday.
All right, well, we want to thank everyone so much for their participation online today. We know that we've covered a lot of information today and your head might be spinning from all of it. If you'd like to see this webinar again, we'll have it as a video at cashforcollegeindiana.org. Again, that's cashforcollegeindiana.org, where you'll also find lots of other FAFSA resources. In conclusion, I want to give a big hearty thank you to Bill Wozniak and Heidi Carl for their wonderful financial aid advice. I want to thank our interns, Lydia and Jake, for fielding all of your questions and making sure they all got in. And finally, I want to thank Ball State University and their communication students who have been working tirelessly behind the scenes to make sure this event is awesome. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.